Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Training Industry Leader Talk, Preparing Leaders to Lead Through Change, sponsored by Canvas, GP Strategies, CLS, The Regis Company, and Impact. I'm Emma, a marketing associate here at Training Industry, and I'm thrilled to have you with us here today. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to go over to help you interact with our speaker and get the most out of today's program. Throughout today's event, please feel free to use the chat for comments and submit questions by clicking on the Q&A icon in your toolbar. Once the session ends, a brief survey will appear in your browser, so please take a moment to share feedback on the session and the speaker. And as always, all of our sessions are being recorded and will be archived on trainingindustry.com. And as an attendee, you will receive a follow-up email from us with the on-demand sessions. If this is your first Training Industry event, we'd like to welcome you. Training Industry exists to make connections among learning and development professionals. We offer tons of resources to support your role in L&D through live events like today's Leader Talk, articles on our website, our magazine, conferences, research reports, podcast, our membership community where you can connect with peers. We'd also love to hear about what you've learned from today's session on social media, so please follow us on your favorite platforms so we can continue the conversation there. And now, without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers from CLS. We have Chris McLean. He's the Vice President of Training at the Center for Leadership Studies. He's a global master trainer and oversees global training and delivery team, helping clients drive organizational growth and leadership excellence. We also have Suzie Bishop, the Vice President of Product Development at the Center for Leadership Studies, where she leads the creation of innovative learning solutions. And prior to joining product development, she revitalized the CLS brand, contributing to its recognition as a top 20 leadership training company. So great to have you here, Chris and Suzie.
Great
Emma, thank you so much. I'm not gonna lie, I was loving that music, and so I now have to reorient myself to presentation mode because you got us all in a good mood with that
That's
music.
right.
So thank you for kicking us off well. Emma, again to you, to Training Industry for having us as one of the sponsors, and of course everybody with us live today. It's so great to see where everybody's from. So definitely grateful and looking forward to starting today's event with a lot of energy. We're the kickoff. So we know this is a big topic, talking about change and the weight that we carry as leaders that can often make us feel stuck. But our goal today is to reach the following objectives and share some key insights on global workforce challenges affecting today's leaders. And we all know that change has a prominent position on that list. So very good topic. We also want to explore the impact change has on success and engagement. So we'll dive into those two interacting variables. And then we also have some characteristics, 6 skills leaders can implement to drive successful change outcomes. Before we dive in though, would love, Emma, if you would launch our poll for us. Just want to gauge your mindset when it comes to change. So when it comes to your natural tendency, do you tend to avoid change? Maybe because you envision the extra work, confusion, maybe the pain points of change, or do you look forward to it? Do you embrace it and all of the possibilities it has to offer? Obviously, no wrong answer here. Just would love to know your natural inclination.
Hey, Suzie, I love this question. I asked you that at the beginning of our change session, and half the room, they're like, yeah, I love it. Let's go. And the other half are like, oh, it gives me hives. So it'll be interesting to see what the majority has here.
And trick question, obviously there should be it depends. Is it a change that
right.
a change that I is kind of put into the works here, or is it change that I just have to accept? Okay, so we actually have many 81% that embrace it versus 19 that's maybe a little bit more reluctant to when it comes to change. Of course, we know it probably is somewhere in between on it. It depends. But Chris, if we go to that next slide, I thought I would share, this is Accenture's 2024 Pulse of Change Index. And they found that the rate of change affecting businesses has risen steadily since 2019 by 183%. Like my brain can't even calculate specifically like what that extent of that percentage means. But that's over the last 4 years and by 33% in the last year alone. So it's understandable that we may not always be jumping for joy to embrace change. While your poll did say that you tend to embrace it more. And maybe that's because we're at a point where it's really not our choice. We may not even be recognizing it anymore. It's probably hard to measure change at this point with how much it's coming our way. And so I'm happy to see, and it's one of the characteristics we'll talk about in a little bit, is there seems to be optimism amongst this group when it comes to change. And we hope that we can give you some additional tools that you can use to better work through it. But really great to see. It seems like we have a positive group, which is awesome.
Oh, and Susie, I love these stats because it used to be, and our executive vice president, Sam Shriver says this, it used to be
Yeah.
you could see change coming, and now it's just here all the time. But I think the second thing is 81% of us embrace change, but more importantly is to know what about our team? Like it's
Yeah.
the people I'm leading may not feel the same way.
Absolutely. Now it's about leading it for others. So while we may embrace it, that may not be the culture amongst our organization or a department. So hopefully, again, today, we're talking a little bit about those skills. Couldn't come to a training industry event without showing some data from them. And so just wanted to share this report that shows that 46% of survey respondents identified change management, so kind of like right there in the middle, as a skill that's most needed by leaders today. I thought it was also interesting if you look at everything above change management, I kind of think of things in a Venn diagram and how these skills start to overlap. It would be pretty difficult to get through a change if I couldn't communicate effectively and provide feedback. It would be pretty difficult to get through change if I didn't have an awareness around my emotional intelligence and how I may need to extend empathy to others on my team. Going through a change really requires strategic thinking and decision making on where are we headed, why, what are the milestones, how do I think through this process? And of course, there's conflict and bumps along the way. So just saw that statistic of 46% of yes, we need to build this skill, but then every single one above it, I think, ties to change in some way.
Well
Chris,
said.
anything there before we go to the next?
No, no, I appreciate you connecting those because that was like the fourth on the list, but the other ones are engaged and included in that. I love your Venn diagram discussion. So no, that was well said.
You know how visual I am.
Yeah,
How do the things connect?
yeah.
But this one's telling me this next slide is like the real struggle we're seeing and why change leadership needs to be that area of focus that we saw from training industry. So a study published by Gartner found that employees' willingness to support enterprise change has fallen from 74% in 2016, so that pre-pandemic, to just 38%. So an extreme drop off. And then a survey by McKinsey and Company found that in organizations that experience some kind of transformation in the past 5 years, only 1/3 of those transformations has been successful.
Yeah.
So we see if you go back to that Accenture data, that 2024 Pulse of Change Index, where the rate of change affecting businesses has risen by that 183%, and then the 33% in just the past year alone, employees aren't even willing to support it, and a third of them are completely failing. So it's no wonder, and we're going to talk about what we call global workforce challenges, that when it comes to change, again, not a part of this group, as this group is highly embraces it, but the frustration that we're probably seeing amongst our teams,
Yeah.
or the fatigue, or the lack of loyalty. It's why retention gets harder. And there's so many other issues that we're seeing so prominently in the workplace when you have these things in conflict, that rate of change, but how people feel about it, embrace it, and know how to work through it.
Okay.
So if we go to the next slide, at the Center for Leadership Studies, we believe that sometimes it's the best to take some of the most complex problems like change and boil it down or distill it into something that leaders can grasp onto and understand. And really, so many of the strains that we're up against as leaders is because these two factors, success and engagement, they often feel like they're at odds versus interacting appropriately in what we like to call a reciprocal or kind of an interacting relationship. So success and engagement, they're these two performance variables that leaders have to think about keeping in balance to ensure productivity and results. So if we look at success, that can encompass, meeting your goals, whether it's a sales or production target. Maybe it's closing out a support ticket if you're in a support role or a client support role. Maybe it's just completing tasks on time within budget. So it's those key performance indicators, those metrics of basically getting the work done to expectations.
Yeah.
And success is necessary to keep organizations, as we know, going. We have to be meeting those metrics, but engagement really drives that success. So engagement can be thought of as the willingness to do well or be a part of the success. Or in other words, it's the performer's motivation to do their work and contribute. So do they understand the value to them, to the team, that bigger picture, to the organization? Or do they have what they need to accomplish their work, such as the appropriate amounts of direction or support? Do they feel like they're a part of something bigger versus just kind of a cog in the wheel or the machine? And we see, pulled a statistic from Gallup that managers really drive 70% of that performer's engagement. So as we're working through change and the speed of change ourselves, we're individual contributors, we're also managing teams. We are also not fully, but we're a huge percentage of responsibility, that's 70% of someone else's engagement and how they are tied to success in the workplace.
Yeah. It's what Dawn said in the chat. The way we manage change is just as important as the end result of change. And what you're speaking to is success and engagement. I love that, Suzie.
And then if you look at these list of challenges, and I would love to see which of these resonate with you in the chat, or if you have a new one, that would be incredible as well. But if you look at this list of challenges, and while we've already talked about some, I'm sure many of them do resonate with you. And this just highlights some of the challenges we've encountered in our research and interactions with leaders. So whether that's in our conversations, Chris is facilitating consistently, whether we're talking with our partners, this is across the globe, across industries. It's those emerging technologies. It's the expectations around adoption, which changes our processes and systems. It's the requirement of the adaptability through change. I know one I hear a lot that's not on this list is the multi-generational workforce is definitely a topic right now. Retaining your top talent. So yes, seeing from Nicole, turnover, engagement, the burnout, the evolving technology, like we are expected to kind of just have these things bounce off of us and keep those success metrics high while retaining our employees. It's a major job to balance those two factors.
Okay.
So I thought, Chris, maybe on the next one, an initial way that as a leader, you might look at those two variables is through some of these examples. So here's how these challenges kind of fit under an umbrella, either success, which is those results, or engagement, which is those relationship behaviors you have with others, while showcasing that they're also greatly impacting one another. So again, kind of a reciprocal relationship. So a Gallup study found that organizations with the highest levels of engagement are 23% more profitable than organizations with the lowest levels of employment. I think that shows our employee engagement. So that really just shows how one impacts the other. Yeah. Or organizations with the highest engagement levels also see 18% higher productivity and about 43% lower turnover. So we see how one impacts the other. So as I kind of look at this list, I look at employee engagement on the right. And when I think about it in my own experience or my team's experience, how that impacts our performance on the left. Well, when our performance is high, what does that do for the retention of those on my team and within my organization? It greatly increases. Yeah. When my retention's high and I have tenure within my company, how does that under success factors increase the improvement of our initiatives because we have all of that knowledge in-house over time? And when that knowledge and performance improvement happens over time, how does that lead to less burnout because people are happy in the work that they're doing and they're feeling successful? So just looking at those as two baseline factors that need to stay in balance while they're always highly interacting with one another.
Yeah.
To drive it home, Chris, I thought we would kind of share our scales a little bit and work
Sure.
through some additional examples that we shared on the list. And in order to be successful, we have to keep up with evolving technology. I saw that in the chat as well. However, the constant change can become exhausting for employees, leading to burnout and turnover. And as we see the results of maybe this evolving technology going higher, 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 there's always something more to improve. Where are we maybe seeing the decrease in engagement or some of those human skills? And then over time, when the bar is so high, but it becomes unachievable, where does that really hurt engagement and then over time hurt performance? And you get into the cycle where this is really out of balance. The next one I thought we would look at is when engagement is extremely high. Maybe you feel like you work at the best place ever and it has all the flexible policies and everyone's so friendly, but then over time, you're not reaching results. And then when you're not reaching results, you have to make really difficult decisions. And those decisions lead to having to let people go. Well, where's engagement now in that workplace after having to make those decisions when the engagement didn't also come with the success factors? So we really like to think about balancing success and engagement. It's a core of our situational leadership model. It's the foundation. It's kind of how we see leadership in general, of keeping these in balance. Of course, there's situations where one does have to be higher than the others, but it's really thinking about this adaptable approach and how you're looking at these global workforce challenges in a way that you can balance these two factors in terms of success and engagement. And Chris, would love to hear kind of your thoughts on some of this as the foundation before you get a little bit more into the situational leadership model.
Yeah, I love this conversation. Nice job leading us through it. And look, I'm talking to leaders. So you're a leader if you influence anyone. So we're all leaders. So I'd ask you to go through this next few minutes thinking about, how am I showing up as a leader? Because I love your word balance, Suzie. I need to be balanced and focus on success and results as a leader, but also need to pay attention to engagement. I love Sean Akers' work in the Happiness Advantage. He said, happiness is the precursor to results. So if I care about engagement, it helps drive results, and both matter. I think another word that works for me here is also just being intentional. Like, there's sometimes when safety is at risk or compliance is at risk, or in a sales organization we're 10% off goal, I'm much more focused on the left as a leader. Success and results is the prominent conversation going on. And then there's times onboarding, investing in training, there's times when engagement is more important. But I like your question, and I think that's the question for leaders on this call. Where do you spend more time? Because both of these matter. It's not a either or, it's a both and. And you set us up nicely, Suzie, for this situational leadership model. I mean, if you know us at the Center for Leadership Studies, this is our flagship. And many of you are already familiar with this. And for if you're not, maybe I'll just give you the high level overview. But I'd like you to do two things as we go through this. Think about, as a leader, how am I doing within this framework? Because as people go through it, two things always happen. Like, one is you realize, oh, I'm already doing these things. That's why that works. And then there's these other moments where you're like, oh, here's an adjustment I could make. So think of it from your standpoint as a leader. And then secondly, think about it with change. Go through this, the rest of this time together, thinking about a change you're helping influence and helping lead. And how does some of the frameworks and tips we'll share help you as a leader? We want this to be intentionally applicable as you go through this. But what I love about this model, Suzie, is it helps me pay attention to the two things you discussed, success and engagement. When I'm leading people the right way, when I'm giving them what they need, the right amount of direction and support, then they're getting to the results they want and they're engaged with the interaction. So if you notice across the bottom, what you'll see at the bottom, the readiness levels from low to moderate to high are 1, 2, 3, and 4. Really, the bottom is where the person you're leading, the person you're influencing, that's where they live. And you're really answering the question at the bottom of this model, how ready are they to perform? If you're leading a change initiative, how ready are they to perform this change? Whatever it is you're leading, it has to start with a diagnosis of, okay, how ready are they? What is their ability, their knowledge, their skill, their experience, and what is their willingness, their commitment, their motivation, their confidence level? So to start leading people through change or really through any task, we have to start at the bottom with the diagnosis. But then what you see at the top of the model is the question for us as leaders. What do they need from me? So we've already answered the question, how ready are they to perform? Now we answer the question, what do they need from me? And these 4 leadership styles are made up of 2 behaviors, and you can see that on the chart here. On the x-axis is task or directive behavior, and that's where as a leader, I'm giving structure. I'm providing direction and guidance as you're going through this process. And on the y-axis where you see relationship or supportive behavior, that means there's dialogue. I'm asking you questions, I'm providing encouragement and a lot of support. And so when you come up with the combination of those 2, you end up with these 4 leadership styles. Now, keep thinking about how does this work in my world? Because we feel like this model fits with any attempt to influence. And so I think about a leader I'm working with currently, and her name's Elizabeth. Hopefully she's not listening to me. But Elizabeth is really at a low level. She's R1 for having hard performance conversations. So as her support leader, she needs me telling and guiding and directing her and showing her how to have these conversations. Now, she's R2 for running her first staff meeting. You know what that means? That means she's hasn't quite done it before, but she's excited. So look, at R2, she needs selling, explaining the why, providing guidance. And what you see with style 1 and style 2 is there's a high amount of direction from the leader. That right side of the model is more leader directed. But then when you shift over to the left side, at readiness level 3, that means they're starting to perform. Think about that with change. They've started to embrace the change. They're making some progress, but there's a little bit of nerves. And so Elizabeth has to give these presentations to the executive team. She's R3 for that. She's good at them, but man, they make her nervous. So look what she needs from her leader: participation, encouragement, that high support. And then the final thing is she's really good at building teams and building relationships. For that, she's R4. She doesn't need much from her leader, just mostly delegate. I wanted to give you the quick example, and I wanted to make one fundamental point. Elizabeth, if that was her name, we'll say that's a pretend name. She's not a certain readiness level. She's all 4 readiness levels depending on the task. Now equate this to leading change. When you start thinking about the people that you're leading with change, or when you lead in general, here's the 2 biggest mistakes we see. One is we overlead. We're too hands-on when people don't need it. Or 2 is we underlead. They need more direction and support, but the leader pulls back. So when you look on the right-hand side, those are the 4 steps that we hope you get to walk away with when it comes to leading change. That step 1 is identify the specific task. Let me just call it the specific change. What is it we are rolling out? What am I implementing? And then step 2, that's the bottom of the model. Let me diagnose. How ready are they to perform? And then step 3, let me meet them where they are. And that's what, and step 4 just says, it's not one and done. There's constant movement. But here's what I would say as you think about the context of change. In our database, with thousands of leaders who take these assessments, the biggest tendency is under leading, too hands off. And when I ask the reasons why, they're like capacity, I don't have time, or I don't want to be a micromanager, or maybe they overestimate people's ability. But here's what I'll say, going back to the statistics that we talked about earlier, I mean, I think it was McKinsey and Company who said almost 70% of change initiatives fail. Here's the question: how much of that is due to the leader? I'll show you this. Our biggest mismatch, and when I say mismatch, that means the style didn't match the readiness level. The biggest mismatch in our database is this readiness level 2 with style 3. Let me explain that for a moment. Readiness level 2 says I am eager to do it. I'm excited, but I'm not performing yet. Think about the first time you drove a car, right? The first time you ran a staff meeting that you had some eagerness, but you hadn't done it before. Or you teach new content. I get excited when we have new content, but I'm R2 because I haven't done it before. But S3, instead of giving me the direction I need, You get encouragement. You ask me questions. Think about sitting in that car first time and the person in the passenger seat says, "You've got this. You're going to be great at driving. What do you think you should do first?" I mean, that's exaggerated, but that's what this mismatch shows. Now apply that to change. When we have people who buy into change and they're like this group, 81% of them embrace it, but they haven't done it before, how detrimental is it when the leader is encouraging without providing direction? So we wanted to show you this framework, ask you to think about yourself. I'll just be honest, I have a tendency to underlead. There's times I need to be more hands-on. So that's what we hope you're thinking about it as we go through this. But let's, keeping this in mind, let's just make it personal for a few minutes. As we're talking about change, I'm curious for our second poll question, how would you answer this question? When was the last time you experienced an organizational change? And I know there should be an all of the above on this list because I think every one of these are relevant. But I'll be curious because you know what's no surprise is we're probably all experiencing some degree of change. I love this comment about under lead because people, yeah, that's really good, Rick. Thank you for that. Yeah, I'll be curious to see. I mean, Susie, I don't know what you have on here, but I am an all of the above. I have A for sure, B for sure, and C and D. So I don't know. What's your answer to this poll?
I'm with Sam in the chat daily.
That's really good. Yeah, we'll see what Emma shows us after you've taken the poll. But look, as we're going through this, and I'll pause for a moment because I'm sure the results are popping up now. But as we're going through these next few minutes, I'd like you thinking about, okay, here's the, yeah, I'm 70%, I'm currently experiencing one. Yeah, we knew we had the right audience within the last 3 months. Look, if you're not in a change, it's coming and good for you. But like we're all experiencing it to some degree within the past year. Yeah, interesting results. Pretty congruent though, Susie, wouldn't you say, with what we've seen before?
Absolutely. And it made me think too, it's for me as an individual, I don't decipher, oh, well, this is a personal change outside of work, and this is a
Good
change that's
point.
happening
Yeah,
at work. So, like, I know the
yeah,
poll was an organizational change,
yeah.
but you're leading individuals that are
So true.
constantly going
Yeah,
through some sort of change, and
so
they
true.
often, like all of us, like don't have the self-awareness to be able to distinguish and separate that from how they show up at work. So
It's really good.
it's kind of a constant, again, daily, if not
Daily.
sometimes
Yeah,
hourly, I'm sure is
yeah.
the feeling. Yeah, something to think about.
No, yeah, thank you for that ad. And look, as we go through these next few minutes, here's the question when it comes to change. How aligned are you with your leader on this change? And what do you do? I wish we had time for this. What do you do when you don't agree with the change, but you have to represent it? But one of the things that we feel like is important is before I can lead it, I need to be aligned with my leader. And so we'll just show you this quickly. I wish we had some more time to spend on it, but you will have access to this afterwards. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on what are the most important questions for me to ask. If I'm not aligned with the company and the leader, people read that when I'm trying to lead the change. So there's a pause before I lead to say, hey, when are we doing this? Why are we doing this? How far in advance can I prepare my team? Like, I love some of these questions. I always ask the bottom right one, is there anything you share with me that I should not share with my team? But this is a great tool for you to pause and think about, okay, am I aligned with my leader to the degree that I can, with integrity, stand in front of my team and peers and colleagues and lead this change? And if not, what questions do I need answered? Because I have to represent the company. So if you have one that stands out, feel free to put it in the chat. But look, I want to get to some characteristics that I think will be helpful. But here's one thing I'd like you to think about. What is the degree of change? Susie, you said it. I mean, they just put a detour sign in my neighborhood. So my traffic patterns change. There's little changes, there's large changes, small things like software updates or a new team member or a meeting gets moved. But then there's these larger changes, company mergers and restructures, major layoffs. So we have to think about what's the degree of change. You know what I found that the size of the change doesn't always determine the difficulty. Sometimes changing a 20-year habit is harder than changing a job. So there's a lot to consider. So we talk about change in the standpoint of, am I aligned with my leader? How does the situational leadership model help me lead it well? And then what we'd like to get to for a few minutes as we're wrapping this up is we have 6 tips that create ownership. What I've learned about change is when the people I'm leading buy in, when they own the change, success and engagement are easier. Change is not easy, but when they are already bought in. So here's the question. We want to give you these tips, and you're thinking about these as a leader. And look, as you go through these, think about them from your standpoint. Yeah, this one's a strength. Oh, this one might be an opportunity. Do a little self-assessment as we go through these 6 tips. But this is where we'll wrap up our time together. And so hopefully you found that we've given you some tools, but this will be a great way to think about how do we create ownership. So Suzie, I'll let you lead us through this piece, starting with open communication.
Absolutely. And our goal, I love that Serena said she had a light bulb moment when you were just going through those questions. Our goal is, whether it's talking about success and engagement, the situational leadership model, and you underlead or overlead, whether it's those questions or now some of these tips, that we give you something to walk away with, that when it comes to change, you can just try one of these things to help you move through it a little bit better, or maybe help people embrace it the way that you are. So some of those characteristics that we try to build in ourselves and amongst our team is open communication. And when it comes to open communication in terms of change, you really have to identify the challenges early and work together to solve them. So you have to be in dialogue in order for the change to go well. I'm not going to repeat the tips here that are on the slide, but I was thinking some additional tips, or maybe something that I do with my team. And I do think having regular one-on-ones where that's that safe space where you can have open communication, it's not in front of the group, especially with someone who isn't always willing to speak up in a group setting. If you have that regular time with them, that's where they can truly share with you. I also thought another one, before ending any meeting, maybe ask, what's one thing we should clarify before we leave? And so that's inviting open communication amongst your team to be sharing with you going through a change initiative. But Chris, would love to hear from you.
I love your tip. I'm stealing that. I think that's great. Look, I mean, that's John Cotter with his 8 causes. One of the primary causes is under communicating the vision. And when you under communicate, rumors fill the void, confusion sidetracks everything. And then look, Gartner research tells us if we have open communication, what you just described, Suzie, it leads to 14 times more success. And here's the big one. 29% less change fatigue. So when I read this one, I know I can do better. So I appreciate you pointing that one out. Nicely done.
Next is flexibility. So it helps us relieve some of the stress associated with change by preparing individuals to adapt. So we know adaptability is really high on the skills that leaders and employees need today. So maybe some tips here are: think through 2 to 3 solutions for challenges you're facing, rather than like immediately just like, all right, go. What's like a brainstorm or a conversation you can have, again, inviting other people in to make sure that you're having some discernment, strategic thinking around those decisions. But the flexibility in the conversation comes when you're open to more than one idea. And I think another one is, when plans change, take a minute to pause and ask, given what I know now, what's the best next step? And I think asking that question also invites some of the conversation that allows for flexibility versus this rigid, this is what we're going to do, now everybody go execute against it.
Yeah, I appreciate this one, Suzie, because rigidity kills it, right? I remember working with a company and they had been on the same paper approval process for 20 years.
Yeah.
And it's not our company, but they introduced a new digital workflow, and one manager just said, this is how we've always done it. And every other department made the change, and he just bottlenecked everything. And you know what? It wasn't the technology that slowed down the change. It was his lack of flexibility. So I love this one, whether I'm the leader or whether I'm the person on the receiving end of the change, we have to have this one.
Next is curiosity. I'm a mom of 2 little boys, so I constantly think about, oh my gosh, they're just so curious. And it's like, when do you kind of lose that along the way? But curiosity in the workplace, you're really helping your team approach change initiatives with questions and an open mind rather than suspicion. So some ways that you might like foster that is just setting aside like 15 minutes a day to maybe do some research or get in the conversation. We even have some chats within the organization on, like, I am not involved in business development, but I'm a part of a business development chat, so that if an idea comes to mind, like, I get the opportunity to question and ask and like throw some things out there. We do the same thing with like developing some content. We just a group of people who are like, I'm kind of curious about this, but it's not my area of expertise, but like I have a channel in place to go put my idea. And then I also really like this one of replace one assumption each day with a question. And often, like, I'll just admit I'm in product. And so me being talking to salespeople sometimes or commercial, I can make assumptions. How do I maybe replace that assumption with a question that helps me grow and understand what it's like to be in their shoes or on the phone with clients or just anything? So how do I replace those assumptions with questions? I think builds curiosity. The next one is creativity. So it gives your team a unique perspective when addressing the unexpected challenges that occur during any change initiative. So when it comes to creativity, something I like to do at the end of each week is identify a problem that I ran into, like maybe where I was hitting my head against a wall, and consider how can I improve a process or avoid that in the future. So like the power of like that pause of saying like maybe in the moment I couldn't see it and it was super frustrating, but now that I'm on the back end of it, how might I get through it? Or maybe ask yourself, how would someone outside of my department, outside of my industry, outside of just being right on top of it, solve this problem? Or go ask as well. Kind of engage your friends, your family, your peers in something that just might give you an aha or light bulb moment.
Good.
Another characteristic is accountability. So getting team members to speak up when they're struggling with a task or some aspect of the change initiative. So I always like to ask myself at the end of the day, and again, this is a daily practice I try to do, not always perfect at this, but did I follow through on what I committed to today? And so kind of holding up that mirror is like my self accountability moment. And then to maybe be a little bit more action oriented, like what's one mistake that I can own instead of like explaining it away?
Good.
And how does that, again, hold myself accountable? And if I model that, how does that then become what my team does when they're interacting with me? Instead of me hearing the whole story, how can they just say, this happened, now what? Can we work together?
So good.
Chris, anything there? I love kind of your points on accountability.
This is a great one, Susie. Look, I think my job and our job as leaders, when it comes to change, is reduce the fear of change and increase the fear of not changing. And if I do that right, then at some point, you can't stay in the same place. And there are consequences for non-performance. But I have to make sure before I get to that I've done all of my part. So yeah, when people refuse to change, there comes a place where they're hindering everyone else. I heard a long time ago, one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. So accountability is I can't let you not move forward when we've all decided to move forward.
You know, Chris, that happened in my fruit basket just this last week. So
can't have a bad apple.
can't have that. The last one is optimism. So optimism really helps your team focus on opportunity associated with change. I like what you just said about accountability. It's like what happens if we don't change? Like what happens if we just keep doing things the exact same way when other departments or our competitors so sometimes I like asking that question of, even though this is uncomfortable or we may not like it, isn't the fear of not doing it even greater? And really looking at optimism as an opportunity. And so kind of a tip that I have here, and I'd love for you to close us with one as well, is when something doesn't go as planned, ask, what's one opportunity this creates? And it always creates something, whether it's a completely new idea, new track, or maybe even just a conversation that you need to have that leads to a more positive outcome, professionally, interpersonally within your organization. So if you can always find something positive in the change and hold on to it, even if you're not completely on board with everything surrounding it, find the one thing that you can hold on to that becomes an opportunity of positivity.
Yeah, so good. Look, I know we're close to the end. We'll leave time for any questions, but I would say with optimism, it's the balance of reality testing. I had a leader who had high optimism and low reality testing and just overcommitted everything, and we could never hit the goal. But then the ones who are so high on reality testing and lower on optimism, now you're the dream killer, right? Nothing's going to work. So I think it's finding balance with those two would be that final tip on that one. And look, we want to give you one more tool because this is a readiness change tool. It's just assessing your team to say what's their preparedness for change. So we want you to have that. Feel free to grab the scan and download it. If I get off this slide too fast, you're going to have access to this deck. But would love for you to have that. It's a good way to look at my team going into a change. How prepared are they? Because it gives me a little bit of a starting point as a leader. So we're hopeful that you find this and all the other tools helpful. Go back and listen to it or re-look at the slides. I know we've moved pretty fast, but look, we know the benefits of leading change effectively. When you take a look at this, we've talked about every one of these to some degree. This is kind of how we built our talk. Okay, what can we do to address performance engagement, success and engagement? How does it allow leaders to implement tailored strategies? So, look, we know the benefits of leading change effectively, and what we hope is you spent 40 minutes with us and you came up with a couple good ideas or tips that you can use yourself. So, thank you for the time, Suzie. I've enjoyed this so much with you, and then Emma, we'll hand it back to you with our last few minutes.
Great. We have one great question from Serena. Chief people leaders often lean more into engagement, while chief operational leaders often lean more into delivering results. How do you overcome that language barrier to give clear and consistent guidance to mid-level managers during times of constant change?
Man, that's so good. I mean, Suzie, I'll take a stab because I'm asked that question on a
Yeah.
frequent basis. But I think it's with examples of what it looks like when one's out of balance. Like when accountability, when engagement is low, then we see turnover and attrition and burnout and mental health issues. And those are measurable, tangible things to talk about with leaders because they see them in their own organizations. When you're over focused on results and not paying attention to engagement, and when it's the other way, we're not meeting the goals and accountability is optional. And so I think finding examples of what are your business results showing in regards to those two variables and using real life scenarios to help make the case that it's both matter. So Suzie, I'm sure you would add something to that as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the only thing that I would add is finding some sort of common ground. Like I'm sure there is respect between the chief
It's
people
good.
officer and operations. So where can you bring in your expertise? Where can I bring in mine? Our approaches can be different, but if we can find some sort of common ground that helps drive the organization forward and specify what that is, I think that common ground then creates a dialogue between the two that helps you see a path forward.
It's good. Yeah, I like that they both would have respect for each other. So how do we find common ground? A lot of times we find both want the same outcome. It's just the disconnect on how we get there. So finding common ground, that's a great one.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you both. Those are all the questions we have.
Okay.
That's all the time we have.
Yeah,
But you're getting so many thank yous in the chat. This was a
nice.
wonderful session. I think we all got a lot out of it. Getting a lot of reactions and thank you. So thanks again for being here.
Thanks,
Yeah, we
Emma.
enjoyed
Thank
it.
you, everyone.
Yeah,
Nice to meet
thanks
you.
everyone. All right.
All right, y'all. That's it for our first session. We have a 15-minute break, and then up next, we have Nick Gervon for their session sponsored by GP Strategies, The Leader's Compass, a framework for navigating constant disruption. I hope y'all stick around for our next session, which again begins at the top of the hour. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.